welcome Senior Vice President and Chief Technology Officer, McAfee, Steve Grobman.
I'm excited to be here. As CTO of McAfee, I'm the geek that gets to write code on a plane and give it to my team when I land. They love that. But I'm also one of you. After 20 years on the front lines fighting cyber threats, I now have McAfee's CISO and CIO teams reporting to me. So like you, I worry about defending my organization every hour of every day. I'm also a recent Texan. In 2017, along with my wife and 2 dogs, I moved to the Lone Star State. What I didn't realize at the time is that Texas in general, and DFW Airport specifically, is known as ground zero for infectious disease in the United States. DFW is the crossroads of 65 million passengers from every corner of the planet. But we don't have to look to Dallas for the largest threat to global health, because there's one threat that reliably kills hundreds of thousands every year: the flu. Last year alone, 45 million cases of flu led to 60,000 deaths. Why? Isn't the answer simple? It's called the flu shot. Of course, we know if the answer were so simple, we'd simply inoculate everyone with the flu shot and call it a day. But like cybersecurity, our defense against influenza is an imprecise science. There are many factors: the effectiveness of the vaccine, the transmissibility of the strain, its lethality. Factors vary year by year with very different outcomes, as you see in the 5 years that we simulated here. Last month, the NIH announced that this year's outbreak is on track to be the worst in a decade. Now, we decided to use the flu as a metaphor for cybersecurity back in December, clearly not knowing that the coronavirus would impact friends and colleagues around the world. The point being that infectious disease requires a spectrum of actions, from sophisticated technology to fundamental, simple, basic principles like, as you just heard, washing hands. Consider the challenges of some of the most fundamental principles in our world. Are we being aggressive enough in the way that we share threat intelligence? No. We must move beyond the hash and move to higher fidelity threat sharing paradigms. Are we patching fast enough to resolve fundamental implementation flaws in all of the components that we count on? No. We've been dealing with Patch Tuesday for 17 years, and patching for much longer. We recognize the criticality of patching, but the data suggests we're collectively not moving fast enough to patch known vulnerabilities, including those that can have significant impacts. Take Bluekeep, a 9.8 out of 10 CVSS score. It was announced last June. This is a vulnerability that takes advantages in flaws in remote desktop protocol that can allow an attacker to have remote code execution. Today, 8 months later, we've addressed only 60% of internet-facing systems. Take another example, EternalBlue. The underlying vulnerability that WannaCry used to spread around the globe to impact nearly 250,000 machines in 150 countries went from an epidemic to a pandemic in 1 day. Almost 3 years later, McAfee's threat sensor array detects exploitation of EternalBlue as its top network exploit, making EternalBlue truly eternal, because significant populations of machines are still not patched. And this January 14th, once again, we're racing to patch. It seems like every Christmas or New Year's, our industry gets some sort of special present, whether it's Spectre Meltdown, or Grizzly Step, or this year's literal curveball. What makes curveball so dangerous? It destroys trust in the building blocks that we rely on for everything that we do. Abusing Curveball, an adversary can sign files and make them appear as part of the operating system, or impersonate a secure website. What does it take to abuse Curveball? Download and run 10 lines of code. That's right, just 10 lines, which is why just days after the vulnerability was made public, multiple proof of concepts were readily available. Many incredibly simple to use, and social media enhances rapid collaboration of these POCs and makes it such that once they become viable, the recipe is spread around the world in seconds. This lowering of the barrier to exploitation exacerbates our challenge, even for complex attacks. In 2017, the Shattered team created the first SHA-1 collision. It took 6,610 years of processor time. Today, their collision can be used to create 2 documents with the same SHA-1 hash, not in 6,000 years, but in less than 60 seconds. It took us less than a minute, using a public script from the internet, to take these 2 documents and collide them so that they have the same SHA-1 hash, which, as you can see, documents from both RSA 2020 and 2019 would be shown as being identical. Now, of course, if you want to create your own SHA-1 collision, that'll cost you about $50,000 of cloud compute resource. That's a bit expensive for a keynote demonstration, even here at RSA. But it's a true bargain if you're a nation state. So if we can't trust our digital signatures or trust that hashes are unique, how do we protect trust? How do we mitigate risk when we know critical vulnerabilities will continue to be found at an accelerated rate? With every patch, we expose our organizations to risk. Patching means change, and change can be destabilizing, which means that we have incentives to defer and delay. We want to know how a patch is going to affect our environment because we know that making changes can have adverse effects. Things can break, performance can degrade, your business can suffer. Yet the risk of not patching, especially as the attacks become more sophisticated, is unacceptable, especially as the attack surface grows. So to patch now or patch later? We've answered this question. McAfee, like each of you, is moving to the cloud, a paradigm where we now delegate the onerous task of software updates and patches. But lifting and shifting outdated architectures does little to solve the problem. The value of cloud only kicks in when we move to a cloud-native architecture. Cloud-native solutions use foundational building blocks that snap together to build sophisticated capabilities. But with cloud comes new threats, cloud-native threats. Some of these are related to configuration errors. Configuring the cloud is difficult because cloud requires inherently more sophisticated policies which add complexity and are subject to error. This is made worse in that often things default access to the internet, a public network. So it's easier to make errors, and when you make those errors, they're exposed to the world. And new paradigms have nuance that, if not comprehended, can expose your organization to catastrophic outcomes. For example, all of the major public cloud providers have capabilities to manage credentials for cloud-native applications. Used correctly, these capabilities allow you to not pass credentials in the clear or store them in source code repositories. One of these is called instance metadata. But if not comprehended, can set an organization up for complete compromise. Let's look at a typical scenario. With cloud's low barrier to entry, a team of epidemiologists set up a public dashboard. to show information on their progress in analyzing the genome of a critical virus, say COVID-19, as shown here. The challenge they have is many of the resources the dashboard requires are not accessible to the internet, only their virtual private cloud. The solution's simple. They can use a reverse proxy, which acts as a middleman to pull the data that's not directly exposed. So a fast online search shows they can do this with a few lines of code. Their basic solution is elegant and functions perfectly, but it set up their organization for a massive breach. Why? What they didn't realize, they're epidemiologists, not RSA attendees for goodness sake, is that their reverse proxy will access both intended and unintended data. One of the pieces of unintended data that they didn't even know exists is instance metadata, which is a cloud-native feature exposed to the compute instance to provide data about the instance, including sensitive information such as credentials, which the reverse proxy can also access and return to the attacker. With the credentials, the attacker may well have access to highly sensitive cloud resources. Let's walk through this from the attacker's perspective and look at exactly what it would look like to execute this type of attack. OK, so here we are on the attacker's machine. The first thing that we're going to do is validate that we don't have access to anything by default. Next, when we looked at the epidemiologist dashboard, we noticed that they referenced the reverse proxy. So here, we're going to simply confirm connectivity. Now let's see if the reverse proxy can access the special URL where instance metadata is stored. Specifically, we look to see if access privileges were granted. And we see that they were. It looks like this instance has full S3 access. So this is promising. Let's go ahead and see if we can actually pull those credentials. We can. We have the credentials. This is the holy grail that the attacker is looking for. At this point, all we have to do is set our attacker machine to use the credentials. We can do this by setting the access key ID, secret key, and session token environment variables. Once we have those, we can go ahead and see what information we have access to. For example, can we see any buckets? In this case, it looks like there's this Santa genome top secret thing. I don't really know what that is, but let's go ahead and exfiltrate it with a simple S3 sync. We have now stolen the top secret data with that simple of an attack. This insidious attack is just one of 43 cloud-specific techniques on MITRE's attack matrix. Now, insidious threats aside, cloud brings us access to new technologies that organizations would otherwise not have access to. One exciting technology holding great promise and that will fit well into the cloud model is quantum as a service. But for our industry, as with cloud, we know that quantum is a double-edged sword. Quantum computing will allow us to achieve breakthroughs in biology, chemistry, physics, and of course, cybersecurity. On the other hand, I'm realistic enough to know that nation states will use quantum to break our public key crypto systems. Now, I know what many of you are thinking. Quantum is not coming anytime soon. But we can't think of quantum in terms of eventually or tomorrow, because quantum is a real risk today. You must assume that adversaries are already accessing your most sensitive data. It's encrypted, but they still find it valuable. They're not worried about encrypting it today. They're counting on quantum to do that in the future. Over 70% of all network traffic is encrypted, much over an untrusted network. We call it the internet. Our most critical data lives in the cloud. Cybercriminals and nation states can siphon off that data today and unlock it tomorrow when quantum cryptanalysis becomes practical. So let's ask, does it matter if your data can be unlocked in 5, 10, 15 years from now? Consider this. Even in 2020, documents in the National Archives related to the Kennedy assassination, nearly 60 years ago, still retain redactions for current national security concerns. Now think about the data in your environment. Two things matter. Number one, of course, the sensitivity of the data, how important it is, but also understanding how long it must be protected. We plotted a handful of examples on a chart to make the case. We place Social Security numbers more to the left. Clearly, we never want to lose a Social Security number, but we must be realistic that 60 to 80% are already compromised. At the same time, they act as an identifier across a lifetime. So we place them higher on the chart. Contrast this with pre-release earnings for a public company. Given their importance before they're released, we plot them far to the right. But given the brief time between quarter-end close and public release, we plot them near the bottom. Finally, think about national secrets. Many will be at the top right. A short story about an ultra-secret project makes the case. When the British cracked Germany's Enigma code in 1941, it provided critical information to Allied land, air, and sea forces that ultimately shortened and won the war. Yet the sensitivity of that project was so great that even people working on it weren't necessarily aware of the objective. And even after victory, we kept this story secret for 3 decades. The core of our future, a post-quantum ecosystem, requires critical work from NIST. We need quantum-resistant algorithms as soon as possible. NIST is already doing amazing work, but we must help them move faster. They require more funding. The quantum research budget is $30 million. That's 0.0006% of the federal budget to solve a problem that's a threat to national security. And this is not an easy problem. Selecting the right algorithm is a critical decision. Of the initial 69 replacement algorithms that were proposed, 12 were broken or attacked in 3 weeks. And after 3 years, we've still only narrowed the field to 26. What about the rest of us in this room? We can move our network traffic to TLS 1.3 right now. And while that won't prevent the traffic from being decrypted by quantum at some point, it does make it significantly more difficult for an attacker to execute at scale. Let's all commit to build post-quantum action plans that measure time and impact sensitivity so that we're ready to migrate the systems at the top right of our charts as the post-quantum ecosystem is ratified. Finally, together, government and industry has much to do in partnership. Let's pledge to start the technical work beyond just the mathematical algorithms, to inventory, understand, and retool all of the systems that are based on quantum vulnerable attacks. Whether it's driving changes through IETF to support a post-quantum TLS, or testing new ecosystems for quantum secure code signing capabilities, we must begin today. I'm confident we can do these things. With quantum, the potential is limitless. Immunologists one day will discover the Rosetta Stone for a universal vaccine, putting the flu and countless other diseases out of commission. But progress isn't waiting for quantum. Our current cloud computing architectures allow scientists to tackle the problems of today, to fight disease, to explore the universe, to power human progress. Let's not hinder our future by remaining blind to the threats that target these platforms. Are we up for the challenge? We can't wait for time to tell. Thank you.